In the beginning, when God laid the foundation of the earth, the sons of God were there, shouting for joy. We might know them as angels or God's heavenly host. And while both of those are correct, we will explore several biblical passages describing just who these sons of God are and what their relationship is to Jesus, God's unique Son. We will compare how the biblical writers thought about the word Elohim with the way the modern church thinks about the word God, and why the difference is so important for understanding the sons of God language.
Well, some of you might feel like I left you hanging with Psalm 82. Again, that was sort of the watershed event passage for me. So I think, again, in view of what I said already, this is not only my sort of episode of the importance of taking Scripture in context and refusing to conform, again, my theology to tradition and just sort of making the text feel a little bit more comfortable. I think it would probably be wise to go back and take a look at Psalm 82 a little bit more closely and unpack that a bit. So that's what we're going to do. Psalm 82 verse 1 opens this way. God, and that is the Hebrew word Elohim there, has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, it's in the midst of the Elohim. So you have Elohim there the second time. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Now, I could go into, again, some fancy, discussion of how the Hebrew grammar tells us one is singular and one is plural. And all that's true, but you really don't even need, to sort of take a deep dive into Hebrew to know that the first Elohim here is singular, the second one is plural. Because if you go down to verse 6, the speaker, again, and this is God in the passage, says, I said, you are gods. And that's the term Elohim once more. Sons, plural, of the Most High, all of you. So you have God speaking to a group of Elohim. Verse 6 very plainly has this plural because it's sons of the Most High. The language is plural. So this is what sort of startled me, and really I didn't get much past the first verse because I am looking at it in Hebrew that morning in church when the guy hands me his Hebrew Bible, and again it just sounded like a pantheon.
Dr. Heiser, what about the Trinity? Maybe the first God, Elohim, God, is talking to the Trinity.
Yeah. If we read the rest of the psalm, we find out that that isn't the case, and it's a good thing because it would sort of destroy our Trinitarian theology. Let's just go back. Again, at ESV, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And here's what he says. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness, and all the foundations of the earth are shaken. So God, he's not happy, again, with what the gods are doing. He's accusing them of certain things. And specifically, they're unjust. The crime is, broadly speaking, injustice, which is essentially sowing chaos among, people. Bad relationships, inequities, all the things that we're sort of familiar with today. I mean, it's not much of a stretch for us to realize the kind of conditions that he's describing. And so the other members of the Trinity, would they do this? No. Would God ever be mad at other members of the Trinity? No. So we're clearly not talking about members of the Trinity. If you keep going, it gets even worse. Here we hit verse 6. I said, again, God speaking to the other Elohim, the other gods, you are gods. You are Elohim, sons of the Most High, plural, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die and fall like any prince. So he actually pronounces a judgment on the other Elohim, on the other gods. And again, this isn't the sort of thing that you would expect in Trinitarian thought, and again, thankfully so, because the other members of the Trinity, Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, is never going to be aligned with injustice and in need of God's rebuke. So we don't really have other members of the Trinity here, which is, again, you can't sort of retreat to that. And trust me, all these things popped into my head, when I'm looking at Psalm 82, what are the options here? And I was pretty quickly convinced that this isn't one of them.
So who are these other Elohim? How can there be other real gods? Doesn't the Bible specifically deny that?
Yeah, this is immediately where your mind would go. And it's actually a good example of how the way we are taught to think about some things ends up sort of filtering or framing what the Bible is saying. In this case, not a very good way or not a very helpful way. Let me try to unpack that. I mean, when we see the letters G, O, and D on a page or on a screen, we sort of mentally default to the notion that the letters G, O, and D, God, they signify a being with a specific set of unique attributes. And all those words that I just used are important. So we see G-O-D, now we're thinking about omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, sovereignty. Again, all these things that only the God of the Bible possesses. So we are just taught, either culturally or in church or whatever, that G-O-D means a unique set of attributes possessed by only one being. The problem is that is not how biblical writers thought about the word Elohim, which is the word we get twice in Psalm 82:1 and once more in Psalm 82:6.
How do we know that the writers of these biblical passages weren't thinking about a specific set of attributes when they used the word Elohim?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a logical question and a good one. The short answer is if you actually look up all the places where Elohim is used by biblical writers, which, I guess if you have insomnia, this would be a good thing to do because there's like 2,300 times. You can look these up in a concordance or whatever, and that's the sort of thing that people like me do. You see pretty quickly that biblical writers will use Elohim of other entities or other things besides the God of Israel. Now that alone tells you that if I'm a biblical writer, I use Elohim to describe this other thing in the spiritual world, that I can't be referring or thinking about the term as though it referred to a specific set of unique attributes, because now I've just added another being that has those attributes in addition to the God of Israel. That's not what they're doing. So Elohim has to, out of the gate, mean something else. Let me give you a few examples. You have, of course, in Psalm 82:1, you have Elohim, the God of the Bible, the first one. Then you have this other group of Elohim who are the sons of the Most High. Okay? And since there's only one Most High in biblical thought, that they'd be the sons of God, all right, the sons of the God of the Bible. So that's a separate group. If you go to passages like 1 Kings 11:33, certain deities of the nations, Chemosh, okay, one of the gods of Canaan, is called Elohim. Okay, Asherah, Elohim. So you can't have the biblical writers looking at a foreign deity, one of the strange gods, to use Moses' language, and say, well, you have the same attributes as the God of Israel. That just doesn't work. Okay, 1 Samuel 28:13. This is the famous story of Saul and the witch, or the medium at Endor, where God won't, answer Saul's prayers anymore. So he's upset. Things are looking bad with the Philistines, and so somehow he has kicked out all the mediums, but he knows where to find this one. Okay, he finds this woman, goes into her house. She doesn't know who he is, and he says, "I want you to conjure up Samuel for me. I have a question." And we're not told what she does, but whatever she does, works, because she gets startled when she actually sees Samuel. And then all of a sudden it clicks in her head, no, wait a minute, you must be Saul, and this is a trap, and I'm in trouble. You're going to put me to death or whatever. And Saul says, don't worry about it. What do you see? What does he look like? And so if you actually read the passage, the woman says, I see Elohim coming up out of the ground. Again, the underworld, okay? And we know it's just one because Saul asks, what does he look like? And so she describes him. And Saul's like, yep, that's the guy, okay? And then they have a conversation. And in that conversation, there's material that we know as readers of the book of 1 Samuel that Samuel had said, things about Saul and so on and so forth. So for sure, you're not going to get the disembodied human dead with the same attributes as the God of Israel. No Israelite in their right mind would think, oh, my child that died young or in childbirth, or my parent or my grandparent, oh, they have the same attributes as the God of Israel. Because we call them all Elohim, just like the gods of the nations. No one's going to be thinking about that. In fact, the way you sort of get the theology that we have, the uniqueness of the God of the Bible, is that God is described in certain ways. It's not about the word Elohim. The attributes are not wrapped up in this one term. God is described in certain ways, again, omniscient, omnipotent, all these things, and those things, those attributes, those abilities are specifically denied in certain passages to other gods, other Elohim. So our theology is intact, our theology is good, but it's not bound to this one word, Elohim. And that's the problem when we're looking at Psalm 82.
So, Dr. Heiser, who are these Elohim? It's still not very clear to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's think about it this way. If Elohim doesn't refer to a specific set of unique attributes, it must mean something else. And the way I would describe this is a biblical writer would use the term Elohim of some entity, something, that by nature they were disembodied and members of the spiritual world. So Elohim is really sort of akin or synonymous with another Hebrew term, rukot, spiritual beings. Okay? Any member of the spiritual world is an Elohim. Now, there are lots of different terms for the members of the spiritual world. We don't need to rabbit trail into that necessarily. There are terms of rank and hierarchy and job descriptions and all this. But fundamentally, if you're a member of the spiritual world, whether you're a supernatural being or the disembodied human dead, like in 1 Samuel 28, this is where you are now. And I use that term to label you as an inhabitant of the spiritual world. Now, in Psalm 82, there are certain members of the spiritual world, spiritual beings, Elohim, that are under judgment. God is not happy with them. If we go over to Psalm 89, again, where we have the same kind of language, we have a reference to the sons of God. This is Psalm 89, 5 through 7. Who is like you among the sons of God? Okay? And you have these different attributes thrown out, and of course the point is that nobody's like the God of Israel, the God of this assembly, and so on and so forth. But again, it's spiritual beings, and the counsel there is in the skies. It's in the spiritual world. It's in the heavens. Again, these are terms that biblical writers would use to describe where God is and where we are not. One of those is the heavens. Okay? So Elohim are just spiritual beings. Now, if we go to 1 Kings 22, this is kind of an interesting example to make this point. We have a passage that I think is sort of illustrative. This is the story of the prophet Micaiah when Ahab, the wicked king of the northern kingdom, Israel, asked Jehoshaphat, the king of the southern kingdom, to come up and plot with him to go up to remote Gilead and enter into some warfare conflict. And so Jehoshaphat goes and visits him, and Ahab rolls his prophets out, and of course they're saying, "You're great, Ahab. Do whatever you want. You're awesome." And Jehoshaphat isn't satisfied. He says, isn't there a prophet of Yahweh around here somewhere that we can ask him? These are all just yes men. And Micaiah, gets pulled out of prison or wherever he was, because Ahab just says he hates this guy because he never tells me what I want to hear. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, they go get him, brings him into the scene. At first, he mocks the question. He acts like the prophets of Baal that Ahab had trucked out. And then he gets serious. He says, okay, you want to know what I see as a prophet? Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, obviously in the heavenly realms, God's abode, all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right and on his left. The Lord said, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, another said another. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And then, the plan unfolds. So here we have the host of heaven. They're called spirits. If we go over to, again, Psalm 89, Job 38, where we have the sons of God, again, the host of heaven, the stars of the heavens. These are supernatural beings. All of these terms sort of refer to their spiritual nature, their disembodied nature, and Elohim is just one of them. Sons of God, sons of Elohim, are Elohim because they're spiritual beings. That's really all they are. And it's just a broad reference to members of the spiritual world.
So why don't we just call the sons of God angels?
Yeah, why don't we?
Be like,
Honestly, it's not the end of the world if we do, because we're used to thinking of that term, members of the heavenly host, angels, why not? It's not precise language, but like I said, if that's just easier, then I don't have any objection to it. Angel is actually a job description. In both Hebrew and Greek, Hebrew is malach, Greek is angelos. It means messenger. And it doesn't really describe what a thing is, what a member of the spiritual world is. It describes what they do. So it's a little imprecise, but again, for our purposes, and maybe someone just to wrap their head around Psalm 82, it's not too bad. So I'm not so vested in it, Elohim, that we have to sort of get away from angel language. But I think it is still important, though, that we realize that God is using, through the writer, a specific term here, Elohim. It's actually going to become important later, like in the Psalms, where humans are created a little lower than Elohim. Okay, it doesn't say angels there in the original text, it says Elohim. That gets filtered to us in the New Testament as angels, so it's kind of 6 to 1, half a dozen another, but it shows that this word is used for plural beings in the text. And so for that point, I think it's important, but for average discussion, yeah, sure, go ahead. If that helps, do it.
so if we have a whole lot of these supernatural gods, sons of gods, what about Jesus? We know that John 3:16 says that Jesus was the only begotten Son of God.
Yeah, on the surface, that seems like a problem. But again, the problem is really with us. We're used to looking at John 3:16, and again, only begotten. And then we sort of zero in on that. And then when we encounter some of this language in the Old Testament, you're right, some people see a real tension there. Behind English translations that still use only begotten, and there are some that are widely used, it used to be thought by scholars that term, which is monogenes, comes from 2 Greek terms, monos, which means one, or only, something like that. And then the second half of it was thought to come from the verb genao, which means to beget, hence only begotten is how the old translations would render that. That's not actually the case. I mean, subsequent research, paleographical discoveries of Greek manuscripts have shown that monogenes comes from monos gene, which means one and then kind. So it literally means one of a kind. It means unique. So what Jesus is he is the unique Son of God, which raises the question, well, what makes him unique? I mean, it certainly allows for other sons of God to be out there in the spiritual world, but what makes this one unique? And of course, what makes Jesus unique is the fact that he is God himself, who is different from and above all these other Elohim. He is God incarnate. He is God in the flesh. So that's his quality of uniqueness. He is God himself. Monogenes can actually be illustrated from Hebrews 11, the list, the hall of faith, as we like to call it. In that passage, Hebrews 11:17, there's this phrase about Isaac being the monogenes son of Abraham. Now here's the question. Was Isaac the only begotten son of Abraham? No. No, he had Ishmael. Okay. Well, was Isaac the unique son of Abraham? The answer to that is yes, because he is the one who is born of Sarah, and he's the son of the promise. So that's a good illustration for how monogenes ought to be thought of. And if we think of it that way, we don't have this tension or this conflict with sons of God in the Old Testament.
Dr. Heiser, when you read Job 38, it calls the sons of God stars of God. And in other places, they're called heavenly hosts. It sounds like the people thought the angels were stars. Did they?
It's kind of hard to tell what's, again, floating around in the head of the average Israelite, even the biblical writers. I mean, certainly we have the language, often with supernatural beings, with the language of metaphor. Again, this is a metaphor. These are celestial objects. Well, that's where God lives. And so these objects up there are his servants. They could get conceived, again, as supernatural beings. Again, they're not astronomers. They don't have modern astronomy. They're not going to be able to parse that. But you could also say they could look at Genesis and see God created the sun, moon, and the stars, and not necessarily sort of conflate those two things. So there are some passages that have a little bit more of an overlap in theory than others. And that probably reflects, what, again, an average Israelite was thinking. If you ask the question, hey, are angels, are the sons of God, are they those things we see twinkling up there? And they could look at you and say, well, sure, they're in the heavens. This is where they live, and they move. They must be alive. I mean, so you have this sort of thing operating, but you also have a very metaphorical level. This works kind of the same way with the word men. All right, remember the Genesis 18, Abraham story where God shows up with two other men. None of them are men, okay? There's God in human form, and then there's these two other guys. And in Genesis 19, verse 1, those two are called angels. But yeah, they're called men too. But they're not really men, but that's the way they look. Okay, so the terminology and the sort of the assessment in the story is based upon appearance. Can you have the same thing here? Host of heaven. God is the Lord of hosts. He is the one who is in command of the heavens. The term really means armies, okay? And so this is God's entourage. It's his army. It's his bureaucracy. It's his, it's his host. So it's kind of hard to know how they would parse things necessarily. Would they really sit there and have like theological discussions like we would? Is it this or that or the other thing? Chances are that they probably didn't care or didn't even think about that. But they're using the language that helps them describe sort of the point of origin or the orientation, or using something in the natural world so that they have the vocabulary to even talk about God's entourage, those who are with him in the heavens who serve him.
Sons of God, that sounds like a family term to us. Does the Bible use that deliberately?
Yeah, I think it does. Sons of God is actually what I would describe and others describe as a rank term also. So it's both family and rank. It's drawn from the ancient Near Eastern court, okay, specifically with kings. Kings would sort of put their family members in a higher status in the bureaucracy, in the hierarchy. So the divine council idea, again, is drawn typically from royal courts, bureaucracies in the ancient world, at least the language to talk about it. So you have, in the Israelite system, you essentially have three tiers. The top is the king, okay, in this case God, and we as Christians would say the triune God is at the top. And then the middle tier is this term, sons of God. So family members, but also by virtue of being family members, they rank a little higher in the hierarchy than the lower level, which would be angels, messengers. Essentially those who run errands and whatnot. Now collectively, there's the heavenly host, the heavenly army, and things like that. But you get this sort of three-tiered ranking system. And what's interesting about it, and I think important, is that when you get to the New Testament, you don't get believers referred to as angels. You do get them referred to as sons and daughters of God. So right away we see this, we have a higher rank even within the heavenly bureaucracy. And that sounds weird. Well, what are humans doing in the heavenly bureaucracy? Well, we were created to be fit for sacred space, to be part of God's family, and also part of a partnership, existence with God, where we serve him and do the things he wants done. And so the terminology actually takes on more significance in that it provides an explanatory note for what, like Paul says, don't you know in 1 Corinthians 6:3 that you're going to judge angels? Okay, there are just things like this that stick out in the text that are just really easy to read over, or what in the world is he talking about there? What is he thinking? In that case, it's fun to even look at the commentaries because most of them have no idea what's going on there. But it's actually an important observation that we are the children of God. We are the sons of God, which is both family rank and also hierarchically. We outrank the other members of the heavenly host. And that's our destiny as believers.
So, when you told us your Psalm 82 story, you mentioned that you got no help from any evangelical commentaries. What sort of explanations of the Elohim did they give in verse 1?
Yeah, this is going to be very common. You know, those of you who are listening or watching that, you have commentaries and might use them. This is what you're going to find. When you go to John 10, for instance, this is typically the justification or the explanation that goes back to Psalm 82. In John 10, verse 34, Jesus cites Psalm 82, verse 6. And I might as well just take a look at that and read it so you're going to get a feel for why the commentaries say what they say. And then I'm going to, I like to think, just dismantle it. It's not very satisfying. So this is a scene where, again, Jesus is having another confrontation with the Pharisees and whatnot. And it's right after, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, they follow me. That's John 10:27. I give them eternal life, so on and so forth. And he gets down to verse 30, and Jesus says, I and the Father are one. And the Jews understand what he's claiming there. They don't like it. Verse 31, the Jews picked up stones again to stone him. Now, if Jesus was saying, hey, God and I kind of agree on this point, why would you pick up a stone and to stone the guy? Don't they agree with God on different points? He's actually claiming, a unity, oneness with God here, and they don't like it. And then verse 32 says, Jesus answered them when they pick up the stones, I have shown you many good works from the Father. For which of them are you going to stone me? Which is sarcasm I love, from Jesus there. The Jews answered him and said, it is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy. Because you, being a man, make yourself God. So that's how they're interpreting his earlier comment. And then Jesus comes back. Here's verse 34, where he dips into Psalm 82. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law? I said, you are gods. And that's Psalm 82:6. Jesus asks, if he called them gods to whom the word of God came, and scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father consecrated and sent into the world, you are blaspheming because I said I am the Son of God? Okay, I'll stop here at this point. Now, what the commentaries are going to say is, look, Jesus is saying, I can call myself a son of God just like you guys can, because you're Israelites, you're Jews, you're God's family, you're God's children. Now think about that. How does that get him off the hook of blasphemy? Is that really what he meant back in verse 30? Like, oh, when I said I and the Father are one, I'm saying I'm just like you guys are, and you're just like me. How does that work? And later he's going to sort of up the ante. In the next couple verses he says, if I'm not doing the works of my Father, then don't believe me. But if I do them, even though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand, here's the point, that the Father is in me and I am in the Father. So verse 30, he claims equality with God. Verse 38, he says, the Father is in me and I'm in the Father. Again, these are strong deity statements. Is Jesus really going to, in between them, back off and say, look, put down your stones, you're just like me and I'm just like you? It makes no sense at all. Not only that, but the commentaries will assume when Jesus says, is it not written in your law, that the point of the Elohim terminology, your gods, they presume goes back to Exodus 18, where Jethro, recommends to Moses, you need help, so appoint some helpers. They say, well, the gods here are just Jews. They're Jewish judges. They're Jewish elders. That they're part of the leadership in Israel. Well, there's a couple of problems. Number one, if you go back and look at Exodus 18, the judges there are never called Elohim. Not once in the entire passage. And is he quoting Exodus 18? No, he's quoting Psalm 82, verse 6. So the whole argument just is a shambles. But people feel like they have to go there to avoid what they think is polytheism or a pantheon in Psalm 82. And my argument is you don't need to do that. Because Elohim doesn't talk about attributes. It's just these are spiritual beings. It's normal language. Nobody's claiming anything about multiple Elohim being multiple gods, like the same as the God of Israel. We're not doing that. Israelites would not do that. Biblical writers would not do that. But that's sort of the reflex interpretation. And it's quite unsatisfying, again, because it has Jesus affirming really strongly his deity in two places in the same passage and then backing away from it in between, which just makes no sense at all. So that's typically what you're going to find. And when I ran into that, I could see the problem right away. But it begs a question, well, how does what Jesus do affirm his deity? Okay, when he quotes Psalm 82:6. My take is this. I think he's trying to make 2 points. Look, fellows, don't you know, again, Psalm 82, there are other supernatural beings in your own Bible who are called sons of God. That's point number one. In other words, this language might be used, really, to say that I am more than a man. Okay, that's point number one. Point number two, when he goes and says, I'm in the Father and the Father is in me, what he does is he says, I'm not just more than a man. I am the God of the council. Okay, I'm the one leading the meeting. Okay, I'm the one charging the others with, their corruption and so on and so forth. So I think what Jesus does really sticks it back to them and says, look, I do have grounds for this language, not only Son of God, but also I and the Father are one, the Father is in me and I'm in the Father. I think all three statements align to a very strong statement of deity. And I think we have to realize this is how they take it, because look how it ends, look how the scene ends. Again, they sought to arrest him. In other words, if this is what he's saying, look, back off, fellas. We're all in one. We're all in this together. We're all unlike you, and you're like me. Why would they want to arrest him? They sought to arrest him, but he escaped from their hands. In a nutshell, they're not viewing the passage the way a lot of commentators view it. That is not the reaction you would expect if that's what's going on.
Can you summarize what an ancient Israelite thought about Elohim in Psalm 82 with being consistent with what the Bible teaches about God and Jesus?
Mm-hmm. Sure. In Psalm 82 we have God, again the God of the Bible, presiding over a meeting where other members of the heavenly host, other spiritual beings, other Elohim, are in trouble. They're under judgment. The difference between them is really at the heart of your question. Remember, Elohim is just a term that's used for any member of the spiritual world. Only one Elohim has certain attributes. This is why Scripture uses statements like, the Lord, Yahweh, there's none beside him, there's none like him. These are statements of incomparability. They are not statements that other Elohim don't exist, because right there they are, okay, in Psalm 82 and lots of other passages as well. So if we remember that Elohim is just a general term, it has nothing to do specifically with a unique set of attributes, but there's only one of those Elohim that has those attributes, we should remember things like, and maybe this is a memorable way to say it, there are lots of Elohim in the supernatural worldview of the biblical writers, but only one of those Elohim is Yahweh. Okay? Yahweh is an Elohim, no other Elohim is Yahweh. And that differentiation is made on the basis of attributes which are described, the way Yahweh is described in other passages, over against the way other gods are described, and in fact, those attributes are denied to those other gods. So there's a clear distinction between God and the rest of the Elohim. Now, the rest of the Elohim are sons of God, but there's one unique son of God who is God himself. And this is actually where we get, again, our orthodox, Trinitarian thinking from. It's a component part that Jesus can refer to himself as the Son of God. He is called the unique Son of God. The thing that makes him unique is that he is actually God and they are not. The rest of them are not. So Psalm 82 doesn't tread on, again, the deity of Christ, the idea that Christ is God in human flesh. It doesn't tread on that at all. In fact, it's sort of an interesting backdrop and a precursor to it. The language of Psalm 82 and how we think about that properly actually helps us think about the relationship between God and Jesus. And the nice thing is it connects the Testaments. There's a consistent presentation here.
God is the creator of all things in heaven and on earth. He is an Elohim, but as the creator of the other Elohim, he alone possesses the unique attributes of sovereignty, omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. He is Yahweh, Lord of the Council, and first person of the Trinity. No other Elohim are comparable. The other members of the spiritual realm are referred to as sons of God, angels, or God's heavenly host, and they assist in carrying out God's will in heaven and on earth. Within the Godhead is Jesus, God's unique Son and second member of the Trinity. Unlike any of the other sons of God, Jesus is God, co-equal in every attribute shared among the triune Godhead. Just as Yahweh is an Elohim and no other Elohim is Yahweh, so too Jesus is the unique Son of God, and no other sons are like him.